Our world is changing, and our world needs new, because new doesn't just think about the world's problems, it cares. New acts boldly to solve challenges, but never forgets the importance of people.
New Zealand is a socially progressive country and it's really inclusive.
New is prepared for today and ready to create tomorrow.
Qualifications in New Zealand are recognised worldwide.
New welcomes open minds and different perspectives.
All of the teachers have been super supportive.
New is progressive and never stops learning.
It just opens my eyes to a much wider opportunities.
New is the problem solvers, the go-getters, the innovators, the big thinkers. New is a New Zealand education, and new is what the world needs.
Hello, welcome everyone. Good afternoon for those of you who are in Latin America right now. I'm calling from New Zealand, so it's early morning here, but we have a little bit of sunshine, which is pretty nice and makes me wake up with a pretty good mood. I just wanted to check that the translation is going all right. Should I maybe talk a bit slower or? Okay, well, I assume it is going okay. So very welcome everyone again. My name is Marta Estellés and I am a Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of Auckland at the Faculty of Education and Social Work. And my field of research is global citizenship education, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And as you know, these Latin American master classes are organized by Think New Zealand, Think New Education New Zealand. And I just wanted to say a big thank you for the initiative and for all the organization. It's been really fantastic. I'm really glad that we are having so much attendance this year. So that's really great. And of course, thank you all of you for being here today. Just for your reference, this class will be recorded and uploaded to the website. I think within 24 hours, and it will be available for you for the next month. So if you need to leave half of the presentation or whatever, yeah, you will have it available there. The class will last around 30 minutes, and so I will do a presentation of about 20 minutes first, and then we will have 10 minutes for Q&A. And during this time for Q&A, just let you know that we will have simultaneous translation into both Spanish and Portuguese, so please don't be dissuaded by the language to participate. As you could see, I'm not an English native speaker either. Spanish is my first language as well. So I know very well how hard it is to work in a language that is not your native language. So yeah, I strongly encourage you to participate. You can use the chat to type in your questions and they will be very welcome. I just thought that it could be great if you could as well, when you formulate your question, just give like a brief introduction, say who you are, where you come from, what you do. So I can have a better idea of who is behind this screen. Unfortunately, this is not like giving a class in person, but well, it's still quite magical that we can connect despite being, in the other side of the world. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope we can learn something together from this in the next 30 minutes. Here I have my presentation. I assume you can all see it well. Thank you again for being here. I am very glad that to see so much interest in global citizenship education for a post-COVID world. And I'm very glad because I think this debate is really necessary right now. When we were at the beginning of this pandemic, we were all so shocked with such an unprecedented situation that we just wanted to go back to a new normality that was as similar as possible to our previous normality. And I mean, this is completely normal. We are all humans and we all need a good amount of certainty to operate. and honestly, in many cases, the previous normality was way better than our new normality. But in many senses, I think, as this graffiti in a subway station in Hong Kong says, we can't return to normal because the normal that we had was precisely the problem. And I think, at least to some extent, I think in educational terms, this is also true. It is understandable that the first educational response to the pandemic was focused on how to minimize the impact of school closures, like with strategies to promote distance learning, online assessment, frameworks for reopening schools, and so on. But the COVID-19 educational crisis, I think, implies much more than a disruption that should be solved through distance learning models. And now that we have somehow passed that first shock of the pandemic, we have to start thinking, I think, of other much bigger pedagogical challenges that this pandemic has posed. And this is when it comes global citizenship education, I think. For those educators concerned with global citizenship education, this pandemic has profound implications for various reasons. So firstly, because this pandemic has highlighted how deeply embedded national identities are within us, even for those of us who hate to hear that slogan of "my country first" from our political opponents. Secondly, because it is the first time that a global issue requiring global cooperation has so profoundly impacted the day-to-day lives of most people in the world. Thirdly, because as we all know, this pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities and privileges. It has widened social and economic divisions. And also here in New Zealand, that seems to have no issues because it's COVID-free right now. It is still, the inequalities has increased a lot as well during this pandemic. And finally, because we will have to handle the troubled times ahead with sustainability issues, the reshaping of globalization, tensions between freedom and security, and so forth. And if we look at popular definitions of global citizenship education, like the one developed by UNESCO, for example, that has been so powerful in inspiring educators from all over the world. All these definitions talk about interconnectedness, talk about global awareness, global empathy. But my point here is that, of course, I agree with all these beautiful words, but these beautiful words are not enough for a post-COVID world. And in particular, they are not enough to face the challenges that I previously mentioned, the challenge of nationalism, of global cooperation, of inequality, and the future ahead. In relation to the challenge of nationalism, during this pandemic, we have seen so many responses. That nationalism has been present in so many responses to the pandemic, like from the border closures and calls to return home from all countries, through to the competition for medical supplies, face masks, the vaccine, and so on. And of course, this challenge is not just an educational challenge, but part of it is also an educational challenge. And in educational terms, this challenge is not only about including global perspectives or promoting international understanding or cultural awareness in schools. Schools need to rethink the subtle and not so subtle ways in which they reinforce narratives and feelings of my country first, through teaching content, values, silenced voices, and so on. And this means that we need to deeply rethink a school curricula in these terms. It's not only about including, international perspectives, and now let's study the rivers of the world rather than the rivers of just our country or region. And in relation to the challenge of global cooperation, during this pandemic, I think it has become more obvious than ever the inability of countries to articulate a global response. of course, most global citizenship education models include this challenge among their goals, but they usually do it from an individual perspective. So, for example, this idea of empowering individuals to solve global issues. But what COVID-19 has highlighted, I think, is that the problem is not only that individuals are not able to imagine or carry out forms of cooperation with other citizens around the world, but in fact that governments and international organizations are not doing a very good job in this regard. So it is not only about fostering youth participation in global issues, which is great, and not all global citizenship education programs promote, by the way, but it is also about demanding more global responses from international and multilateral organizations, and also about critically analyzing the limitations of and democratic nature of multilateral and international organizations. And I think in this regard, there are some historical precedents to be slightly optimistic. If we look at 100 years ago, and after the influenza and the First World War came the League of Nations, and after the Great Depression came the welfare state, and after the Second World War came the UN, the United Nations, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And currently, we are also seeing more awareness about the need of more public infrastructures that protect us in health, social welfare, and so on. But history does not follow a linear progress. We all know that as well. And so that's why global citizenship education should focus more on the actions of governments and international organizations, and stop pointing individuals as the main responsible for solving global problems. In relation to the challenge of inequality, well, now that this pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing inequalities in terms of gender, class, and race, and it is even more urgent to rethink school curricula in these terms, and to rescue the idea of the schools as a means of compensating social inequalities. And very often global citizenship education promotes very paternalistic engagements with marginalized populations and the so-called third world, reinforcing ethnocentric views and white supremacy, or even it is used to mark differences between students, those who are cosmopolitan and those who are not, those who don't have those global networks, or those language inadaptability in other languages or whatever. And finally, the challenge of the future ahead, which will force us to ask tough questions and to make tough decisions, and I think we need to learn how to make such questions and decisions. And I'm talking about, for example, the dilemmas about privacy, about technology, like privacy versus security, the rise of authoritarian populism, the sustainability, ethicality of our lifestyle, and so on. And these are all controversial, difficult questions that global citizenship education frequently tends to avoid. And I think we need to recuperate that idea of schools as public spaces where public affairs are discussed, and where we can radically reflect upon the consequences of our acts. But again, if we look at what countries are doing in relation to global citizenship education, unfortunately, they are sometimes very far away from addressing these challenges. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to briefly talk about the New Zealand case, because, well, apart from the obvious that, I am here in an event organized by Education New Zealand, but also I think that it could be interesting for a Latin American audience, because at least what I know from my experience, I've been a teacher in the past in Chile, and I'm also a little bit familiarized with the Brazilian curriculum, school curricula. So I think the New Zealand case is quite different, and in some cases it offers more possibilities, I'd say, but in some others it has some key limitations that is important to point out. So I will do just a quick overview to have a brief idea and to discuss it later on. So firstly, well, New Zealand there is not a curriculum as such in global citizenship education. It instead appears as a kind of leitmotif that expects the students to engage with issues of sustainability, citizenship, globalization. And in general, the New Zealand curriculum, and this is, I think, the main difference from what I know from the Chilean curriculum or the Brazilian one, has a pretty open nature and very low levels of prescription, which gives teachers autonomy, a lot of autonomy to focus on global issues. But as some scholars have critiqued, is that the focus of this New Zealand curriculum is sometimes too vague and ends up focusing more on how to prepare students for a globalized and increasingly globalized economy, rather than to face the challenges that I previously mentioned, the challenge of inequality, of global cooperation, and so forth. And social sciences has traditionally been the main curricular vehicle for global citizenship education, as in many other countries. The current social science curriculum emphasizes issues within and beyond New Zealand, and it includes these international perspectives that I talked about before. And more importantly, I think it promotes youth participation in global issues. In general, it advocates for a social inquiry methodology that is quite widespread among social science teachers in New Zealand, and that it also includes taking part in global communities and in global action. So this is really interesting. But also the New Zealand government has funded the creation of different global citizenship education resources to support teachers. So, for example, the government founded organization called Global Focus Aotearoa created really rich global citizenship education to support teachers in addressing global issues from a critical perspective. And also the Ministry of Education resource Putatara aims at supporting schools and teachers to incorporate sustainability and global citizenship across the New Zealand curriculum, and it does it including perspectives, local and indigenous perspectives. But unfortunately, not everything is so fantastic. Classroom-based research has also revealed some important limitations. So, for example, some studies have shown how New Zealand teachers usually include an international focus when teaching citizenship knowledge, when they study human rights and systems of governments or community decision making. But what these studies have also pointed out is that some teachers usually reduce the critical and political content of the global issues because it was perceived as too difficult for the students to comprehend. Also, classroom-based research has revealed that New Zealand schools located in wealthier communities are more likely to focus on global issues than those in poorer communities. So this makes that the global awareness and global networks acquired by students from wealthier communities become a form of elite participatory capital that serves to mark social divisions rather than to reduce them. And finally, research has also found that New Zealand students often held soft rather than critical perspectives when studying global citizenship education topics, and holding at times quite paternalistic views about the others. So this means that although New Zealand has some good conditions to develop a critical global citizenship education with an open and low prescriptive curriculum and a widespread social inquiry approach, there is still a lot of work to do, as in many other countries, if we don't want that global citizenship education becomes a mere post-COVID-19 pedagogical utopia. And this is all for today. Thank you very much for listening. This is the presentation, but of course I'm very happy to respond to your questions and listen to your suggestions, comments, or whatever. So please, I really encourage you to participate. Here I have some of the references of the work that I am based on I based on the presentation. So in case you would like to do some further research, I can see someone in the chat saying a few things. So I will start reading them. What kind of activities you think that can motivate studying online? Do you have any recommendations? How New Zealand kept up their economy with the pandemic? Oh, okay. Wow, these are all really interesting questions. I will read them aloud. And what kind of activities you think that can motivate us to studying online? Do you have any recommendations? Well, during this pandemic, I think that, thank you very much for this question. I think it is very pertinent now that we have so many activities online, and this is one of them in the end, right? I think that during this pandemic we have seen lots of initiatives that has been really interesting, and I was particularly interested in those that have been trying to go farther to try to push the limits a little bit and have not stayed in just, well, this is a teacher giving a speech and the kids just listening. But I've been like part last year, for example, of a project to connect kids from the Galapagos and kids from New Zealand. And because it was a project to connect children from different parts of the Pacific Ocean, so that was really interesting because it was all about like creating like more global networks and more cultural understanding and everything, and we started like by just having like first meeting like kids from one part of the globe and to connect with kids from other part, and of course they didn't know the language of each other, so ones were speaking in Spanish and the others were speaking in English, so it was really interesting to find like creative ways to communicate through music, for example. So they like little dances or music, or they found they also like created small presentations in the other languages to like sharing what they know about the other countries or things like that. That was a really interesting one. So yeah, again, just trying to find ways that makes it a little bit more interactive, and that we can keep like connecting and making more the pedagogical interactions more human rather than me just talking and you listening, unfortunately. Another question, how New Zealand kept up their economy with the pandemic? Well, that's a good question. This is definitely not my field of expertise, but I assume that we were all really surprised that in some cases New Zealand having the first industry, tourism was one of the first industries that it was not so affected in other cases. It has been like still promoting tourism, but mostly within the country. And it has also been promoting like internal projects just basically to conserve some areas, some natural areas and things like that, promoting road constructions and things like that. But this is definitely not my field of expertise, so I'm just giving you some very general ideas that I know from newspapers and so on. So other questions. how to, how can we face the education process in a crisis, political, economic, and health in rural areas? I think this is a really good question, because we have tend to each time we talk about education, and we seem to focus always in urban areas, which is sorry about this. I was not understanding this. Sorry. Okay. I was just saying that, yeah, this is a really interesting question, because usually what we have is that we always focus on urban areas rather than in rural. But again, I think that trying to find ways to connect both areas. Now that we also have technologies and we are getting more and more used to use them, I think it could be a very good moment to try to to build bridges between both areas and learn from each other, because there is always like this stigma with rural kids that they are always behind, it seems, and so we don't value what they can contribute and on all the perspectives that they can provide. So I think that it could be also really interesting, and the same as I told, and this is a story that I told about New Zealand kids from New Zealand kids connecting with kids from the Galapagos. An initiative like that could be like really interesting. But obviously, yeah. This is only at a pedagogical level, at a classroom level, but there has to be as well some policy, some policies at a national level that address these issues, so it doesn't widen the inequalities between both, and to make sure that these rural areas keep receiving resources and rich experiences to all of them. Thank you for that question. That was a really interesting one. How do you think that the public education can improve, and how is the public education in New Zealand? Well, I think thank you very much for this question. I wish I had a good answer for this, but I will try to do my best. I think some of the things that I talk in the presentation like definitely give some clues about this. So I think that New Zealand public education has some really good conditions to start from, in the sense that the New Zealand curriculum is quite open and low prescriptive. And there are the approach is usually very social inquiry. They use a lot of social inquiry approach, which is really interesting, and they tend to use very active methodologies and things like that. But at the same time, what we have seen in the statistics is that it tends as well to reproduce inequalities, economic and social and economic inequalities. So there is like the academic achievement of, for example, Pacific and Maori children tend to be like much lower than the average. So that's definitely an issue that public education should be addressing. And I think also trying to politicize the curriculum much more. It tends to be, as I said before, there are some topics that it seems to be like too controversial for the school curriculum, but I think it is schools should be that place to discuss these issues and to get children engaged with current events and with both global and local issues, and to get them more not only knowledgeable but also engaged in them. So I think it is definitely something to think about, and also about it is also about resourcing as well. Okay, so I think that's all for today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for for all the questions. They were really interesting, and I'm really glad to have been here. You know that, well, there will be other sessions today. I think the next session will be about digital storytelling in higher education. So I strongly encourage you to participate in that session and in the others organized by Think New, Education New Zealand in this event. Thank you very much again for participating, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you.